everybody. So thank you for joining us again in one of our virtual sessions. Today is going to be a bit different because we have committed to provide you some very practical and very day-to-day use cases of service design in this particular case. We have two speakers who are going to be talking in great detail of how they have used service design methodology and framework and mindset in the dire times we've been living through the past 3 months. So let's just go ahead. We have a lot of content to go over today, so we're going to go very quickly here to the introduction. So as always, thank you so much to Slalom and Practicality for allowing us to be doing this and provide you this content. Recently, it's been every couple of weeks, every week. We may actually go back to once a month in July, August, but it's been great to have all this content brought to you virtually on a weekly basis. As always, so I am Greg Lacloufi from Slalom, and this is Brandon Ward from Practicality, Christopher Robin from Capital One, and Brenda Pling from GM Financial. So we are Service Design Dallas, which is the Service Design Network Global network, and we are the Dallas chapter. As always, this event is being recorded. If you haven't had a chance to attend the past several sessions, you can actually just watch the recording on our YouTube channel, Service Design Network Dallas chapter. And you can catch this one if you have to drop, or if you actually send this link to somebody else. It'll probably be live tonight, this evening. Let's see. So today, let's talk about our upcoming guests. Go through the open Q&A rules, and then we'll talk about the service design success stories that are coming out of this COVID-19 issue. As you remember, we've had several master design, service design series so far. We have Mark Stigdorn, Adam St. John, Jim Kalbach last week, and we will have Andy Porlane, of course, next week, in 2 weeks. Andy's topic will be a bit more advanced. We call it like Service Design 201. We're trying to, again, navigate the wide spectrum of content the service design has, and it will probably dive a bit deeper into the business of service design and kind of like the advanced topics. So that's something very interesting for people to listen to. We also today are having Kristin Patterson from Alto in Dallas, and Narges from the city of San Francisco, and they will definitely discuss what they've been going through the past 3 months as navigating through these COVID-19 problems. We will also have Jesse Grimes, who's going to be talking about innovation startups. He is the editor-in-chief of Touchpoint magazine, which is a service design network magazine. We will also have Megan Miller from Stanford and Eric Flowers from Intuit on July 14th, and they will talk to us about very practical tips about service design. So looking forward to actually, again, get some very high level thinking service design all the way down to like very practical tips for you guys to do in your everyday work. So as Brenda was mentioning earlier, if you have any questions to either Kristen or Iran, you can just go into the Zoom chat window. We ask you guys to make sure you label your question, the question to the panel, so either to Kristin or to Iran or to both of them. There's quite a bit of a chatter going through a chat room, so sometimes it's kind of hard to figure which one is the question for them versus to amongst yourselves. So be very nice and be very make it easy for Brandon and Robin and Brenda to kind of find those questions. And I'm also asking you guys to ask questions as early as possible. We're going to curate them for you. We don't want to have 35 questions with 5 minutes to go. So if you have a question, just don't be shy, just ask, and we'll keep track of those for you. Very quick, I just want to make sure we understand, we are talking about success stories of service design here, but this is a very, very dire situation that we're living through on a global level. There have been over 435 deaths, right? So those are just not numbers. Those are actually people who passed away. Those are fathers and mothers and sons and daughters. So this is definitely something that is not light topic. There are over 8 million people who actually are suffering from this virus all over the world. So this is not something that is easy to discuss. We're about to get to some really, I want to say, nerdy topics, and we have a tendency to get really excited about the stuff we do. We're very passionate people, and we're going to talk about success stories. But obviously, this is a very bad situation, and we're trying to figure exactly how companies are able to somehow survive through this pandemic. But this is definitely something that is not a success story by any means, right? So we are going to have, I think first, Kristin is going to be talking about what they've gone through the past 3 months. She's obviously the head of product for Alto, which is a ride-hailing company out of Dallas, and they've obviously had some difficult time to stay in business for the past 3 months since nobody was, using the services. And we also will talk to Narges out of San Francisco, who will tell us how the city of San Francisco was able to navigate and cope through this COVID-19 pandemic, from how to handle paperwork, to handle people coming in and out of buildings. So we have some very practical tips from them, what they've gone through, their successes, their failures, what they've learned, and hopefully you can use some of that for your own projects. Kristin, do you want to start up?
Yes, thank you, Greg. Thank you all for having me here. Hi, I'm Kristen. Like Greg said, I'm head of product at Alto, which is a local Dallas ride-hailing startup. We're just a little over, now we're about 1.5 years old. Conceptually, the idea of Alto was incubated for stronger emphasis on safety, cleanliness, and control. And so with that, we own all the cars and employ all the drivers with background checks, cameras facing inside and outside of the car, thorough cleanings every night. And so we kind of took that as an opportunity. When COVID did hit, we lost 90% of our ride-hailing business within the week that it landed in Dallas. Thankfully, before then, we had been working feverishly to get our V2 app of both our driver and passenger apps ready for launch. We had completely restructured the architecture to be more nimble and accommodate quicker, more complex changes going forward. And so within 2 weeks of our targeted launch date, we actually very quickly pivoted, and it was a group effort. The whole company worked day and night, 2 months straight to, with launch, and then debugging and recalibrating after launch to launch and learn to repurpose our ride-hailing app to accommodate deliveries. And so with our trusted drivers and our clean cars, we pivoted to what we're calling a concierge service. And our portfolio over the course of 2 months went from 2 products to 5. We dipped our toe into e-commerce, and that business channel is thankfully now thriving with the new landscape too. So we were able to kind of just see what was in need. And as we've all observed, that changes week to week and month to month. But we were able to respond and see a big turnaround in our business to where now, thankfully, we are able to roll out into a new city and a new state before end of year with our new portfolio of 5 products. The tentative service design, from my understanding, is just see what's needed and use qualitative and quantitative data to back that, but then interpret it with our expertise. And so we're still doing that. It's not necessarily, it's like the Henry Ford quote where if you listen to what the customer wanted, they would have more horses instead of a car. Same thing with Steve Jobs. But we're still trying to do our best to be shepherds of clean, safe, consistent rides and deliveries with the tenets of service design in mind. So we now have these plexiglass barriers in all of our cars, which has been a huge safety measure, not only for our passengers, which we've seen a stark uptick in since Dallas has been opening, but for our drivers as well. And with that, we're still requiring that all riders wear masks in our cars. And so in contrast to asking people what they want and just giving it to them, we've had, a small population of riders I can count on one hand, but who don't want to wear masks in the cars. And so taking a step back and observing the landscape and observing the needs, our product still staunchly insists that masks be worn in the car. So it's been a group effort. It's been week to week, just observing the qualitative and quantitative data and making the best decision we can. I do attribute our small size as to being able to react so quickly and remain so nimble, but we're coming out of this stronger, and for that, I'm just really thankful.
That's so cool. Greg, you were on mute.
Yeah, does anyone have any question for Kristen at this point? I guess I can start. So Kristen, you want to walk us through how you were able to go from the shocking surprise of like, okay, this is happening to our company. We're going to be losing 90% of our business tomorrow. To kind of like regroup and kind of like using service design as like, a framework where we're kind of like, okay, what's happening? What can we do? So how did you kind of like physically react as a company?
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you went to startup mode, I'm guessing like overnight, right?
Yes, we did. Yeah, it was burning the midnight oil for the first 2 months of COVID, while we just, I will say it was true startup mode. It was like, let's just at least assess the information in the limited time we have and go with our gut. And if it works, we'll pursue it, and if it won't, we'll pivot. And thankfully, we tightened communication. And anecdotally, as I'm sure we can all relate, whether you're going back to the office or staying remote, communication has been a little hampered. You miss that visceral, nonverbal feedback when you're in person, and then you do miss the complete nonverbal of the face when you're in person with the mask. But we had daily 8:30 a.m. Leadership calls to just keep the lines of communication as tight as possible. Same thing within our teams, just keeping everybody on the same page so we can move quickly.
Did you jump to prototyping immediately? Like I'm guessing you had a meeting. It's like, hey, we need to have some sort of like a safety measure for our drivers, right? So you actually went immediately to the warehouse or whatever you had. It's like, hey, how can we just protect them from this? Did you just prototype? Was it most like ideas first and kind of like trying to measure this before prototyping, or how did you work it out?
Yeah, before shelter in place hit, we were all able to be in the same conference room with masks and our whiteboards. And we just kind of whiteboarded what it would look like to repurpose our passenger app to accommodate deliveries and how we would make that transition seamless for the user, so they didn't feel like it was an afterthought. And a lot of work went into that. We filled out all the whiteboards, which was great. And thankfully, as part of our V2 architecture, we incorporated something called remote config, where we can change, copy, and kind of experiment with the language and the user flows and how intuitive it is, without having to do an app push and wait for overnight approval from Apple. So we did get to experiment, and now with our rollouts, we can roll out all of our prototypes, or near production apps to within the company, and we can have people kind of punch on it and give real-time feedback before we roll it out to the public.
So did you very quickly have some areas of improvement, like the physical space was one thing, the app was another one, the ordering. So did you have all those different organizations? You actually just kind of like use an agile way to actually, hey, the 5 of you guys think about a new app, and the 5 of you kind of like work collectively as a group?
Yeah, it's been a true group effort. So our ops team found and also brought in this spray that keeps, we're offering it to customers as well as using it internally daily. But the spray will keep surfaces clean and germ-free for about a year. It's a special ozone type material. So we spray the cars down with that. That's been, on the operations side. On the marketing and more customer experience side, that's where the e-commerce idea came from. So we erected a site, leveraged Shopify, and then partnered with a lot of local businesses. From our business development department, we created a business portal so that like the Audi dealership and any restaurants who want to start assisting their customers with our fleet can use that. So that's one of our new products as well. And then from the tech team, repurposing the driver and passenger app to accommodate deliveries. And now we're adding new technology to make the fleet even more efficient. So it's been a true group effort.
Okay. So you obviously consider going from like delivering people to delivering food, right? This seems to be like a very easy way to kind of reduce the same, leverage the same assets. So how soon do you actually get to the place where kind of like, hey, let's start doing Uber Eats basically to stay in business?
We're actually seeing a positive uptrend in all of our business channels, which has been one factor in facilitating our rolling out into new markets before end of year. So we Alto had turned 1 with to start 2 products, and then within 2 months we now have 5, and with those 5 we'll introduce ourselves to new states.
Okay, so how would you gauge your success over the past 3 months? Obviously, things have been rough for a lot of companies, you included. And how do you feel about it now that we're kind of like easing out of COVID? Do you feel like you are a better company now? You've learned, to become better, faster, stronger?
I think we are set up for incredible success, and I'm just in awe of what this is all going to look like going from 2 products to 5 in 2 months. I don't think without the crisis we would have had that fire under our feet to pull it off. Like that said, with the return to ride hailing, this is something where the business is important and the decisions we've been making have been constructive and productive. But even return to ride hailing, it was an alignment of leadership that we needed. The plexiglass. It was an alignment of leadership that we needed to insist that everybody wear masks in our cars. It's not just about the business, but the people make the business, and so we want to keep our riders and our drivers safe. So
if it's okay, we're going to switch to Iran. Iran, if it's okay, you can actually discuss your case study, and maybe we can get all the questions at the end because the question may be similar, right? So let's hear about your stories first and how you handled this, and then we can get some question from the crowd. Is that okay with you?
Sounds good to me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I do have some slides. Actually put these together for a Design Week event later in the week since it's San Francisco Design Week. So if you will bear with me here. Okay. Is that working?
Yes.
Okay. So I worked my entire career in the private sector. I started as a graphic designer and did that for about 15 years. And then I entered the world of strategic design in 2013 when I joined Adaptive Path. In January of 2019, I took my very first public sector job. And that was when I started learning about the world of permitting, which is every bit as sexy and wonderful as you can imagine. Okay. Whoop. So I was actually hired to be the service designer for the new permit center. San Francisco is building a new building. It's almost done now. The rendering at left is from 2018 when it was just like kind of a skeleton. And this was sort of a future concept to bring together a lot of different departments in the city that were doing permitting in one form or another and co-locate them. And it was part of a larger kind of mission to simplify the process because it is notoriously and legendarily gnarly and complex and slow. And also the FBI rolls into town every decade or so and hauls people out of the some of the permitting departments. That happened most recently, very shortly before COVID hit. So the building is going up basically on schedule and as planned. It seems like a minor miracle under quarantine, but this is a real photograph. What's not happening is our grand opening anytime soon. So my work has changed dramatically since COVID hit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've been up to. But it is relevant to the story that I have spent over a year now immersed in the world of permitting and learning a lot about building permits in San Francisco. So it's the year 2020. You would be amazed at how paper-based this is. These shots are from earlier in the year. This is how you get a building permit in San Francisco, or at least it was up until a couple months ago. So people are moving around giant rolls of paper. Those pink pieces of paper you see attached to the giant rolls, that is an application form that you had to fill out by hand. Couldn't even get a PDF online of that thing. I want to say a couple things about being a public servant versus working in the private sector, because the climate of this work is really different. I started as a service designer working in a consultancy, and I had clear scopes of work that were contractually agreed upon, like a really clearly articulated process. We spent a lot of time and energy making deliverables to give to our clients, because when the engagement was over, we were out of there and the deliverables were what we left behind. And then of course, this is in the context of capitalism and competition and your customers having choices. So government's pretty different. It can be quite chaotic. If you think that you are under-resourced in your private sector job, like it can be a real eye-opener seeing what your local government has to deal with. Specifically as a service designer, there are so many different little bureaucratic silos, and so much of this is like people pushing process around. There's a lot of organizational work to do specifically, and that's a place where service design can offer real value. And then, I'm in it now, so I'm not a consultant. Like, I'm accountable, and I own the successes and failures in a way that I didn't before. And then, of course, we are a monopoly provider of the services that we do. So that is a very, very different landscape. On March 1st, we were in Paper World. Those pictures that I took, that was what building permits looked like in San Francisco. So there's the forms, there's the stamps, there's a ton of physical stamping. Everything has to get a stamp. March 15th was a Sunday. We'd been working through the weekend to adapt a pilot that we were running for the new permit center. So there was an existing office space where we were piloting many of the processes and the pieces of technology that we're planning to roll out later this year. And COVID was really starting to hit. So the same week that people were starting to really get freaked out about COVID in San Francisco, the head of the Department of Building Inspection was also removed from office by the mayor because of some of the local corruption scandal that I mentioned earlier. So we, the permit center team, are on site running this pilot. Suddenly we have to adapt what we're doing for physical distancing. But by Sunday, we had heard from through the mayor's office that shelter in place was gonna hit, and we had to shut the whole thing down. So there we are with this very complex, multi-departmental process that we are right in the middle of, because now we've hired customer service associates for the new permit center, that are starting to learn their jobs in the existing locations. We have, we're sort of embroiled in this process now. And the other thing that we had done was started to facilitate all of these different departments that work together to review these things to adopt a digital plan review tool. And we had started piloting that actually in February as a separate initiative. We'd done 3 projects. So mind you, there's about 2,300 building permits issued a year in San Francisco. We'd done 3. And now we all have to stay home, and we have this terrifying new disease. And so on the other hand, we also had this city requirement that certain essential construction activities had to continue, right? So we're trying to build housing. There's things like, hey, COVID testing sites that need permits and homeless shelters, right? So we have a mandate to keep essential construction going, and also a mandate to protect staff and customers. And so we decided to do rapid digital transformation. And I am organizationally part of digital services. I had been working with the permit center team very closely, but now I'm remote along with the rest of digital services, and I went home to my home team. I took all of the knowledge that I had about the process of permitting and the relationships that I had with the departments, and I brought that back to the digital team to help facilitate this emergency digital transformation. And so what I have brought to this as a service designer, we had a lot of people in different departments, even within the same departments doing different roles. We had a lot of new things that we needed to create. And so in order to make sure that we were stitching together something that didn't have any broken pieces and gaps, I fell back on the trusty tool of service blueprinting. And because we're not in a consultancy environment anymore, and the value of this tool is really like figuring stuff out, it never went beyond the Google Sheet version of this, with the exception of some things that a colleague of mine created to help staff kind of understand, like, this is a completely new process. And so these web pages are completely new. So having screenshots of the different things that people would look at going through, doing that a little bit more visually was helpful. But mostly what we're doing is figuring out new process every single day and identifying, like, all right, there's an email that needs to go out. There's a web page that we need to create. And we're trying to create a digital application experience. So we have this existing plan review tool. Now we have to put a digital front end on it and then figure out a whole bunch of other things afterwards for issuance of permits. And so by April 1st, we had the very first bare bones form up. It didn't do much. If you already had a project in process, you could upload digital plans and they could be reviewed. By May 8th, we had a fully digital form experience for the most frequently used building permit applications in San Francisco. And we were starting to take in, over the last few months, we've taken in thousands of permit applications. So the things that we took online over the last several months, we thought that this was going to take years. Like, as the service designer for the new permit center, that was designed around a majority paper process on opening day. And we very much hoped that we would evolve away from that towards digital, but it was like way out there. And guess what happens when you take an incredibly complex process and you shove it in a fully digital transformation in 2 months? This is not, I am so proud of everyone who worked on this. This was like a colossal team effort, and people worked so hard. And I'm proud of the work we did, but it is not a success yet. It is not perfect. It has problems. And so we are continuing to work on this. There are some takeaways that I'd like to share because they may be relevant to your work, and I think they're interesting. So as Kristen was saying, like, this was an incredible catalyst for getting stuff done that seemed impossible. And the amount of progress that we were able to make was amazing. We learned a lot of stuff. This is not a good way to learn things. It's like doing surgery instead of taking an x-ray or doing something else non-invasive. But we learned some fascinating things about this process. So there was a lot of work that was not captured or documented anywhere. So imagine trying to run a business where you have no data on hundreds of thousands of hours of staff time, let alone what your customers have to do. So people, there was a whole kind of informal and not well documented process up to the point where things would typically have gone into the system. And so as we think about transitioning this service digital, like, really getting our arms around that work and figuring out what that translates into is a big one. There was a lot of friction in the old system and people complained about it bitterly. And right now what we're discovering is we took away too much friction. So we now have an imbalance between what the rest of the process is able to accommodate and what we have enabled through our digital front door. So we're going to have to design back in some friction points in order to get this thing balanced out again. This was a completely insane thing to do. Like, there's only so much change that you should ever attempt at one time. And, we all knew that. And then we did this anyway because we felt like we had to. But do not recommend. And I'll leave it right there.
So before you walk away, let's talk about this friction, because obviously as service designer, the number one question that we'll be asked is remove friction. Like a frictionless environment is the ultimate goal, right? So the idea of reintroducing friction is interesting, and I'd like to know more about it, because why? Is this too good to be true? Is this like, what do you mean by that exactly?
At the moment, our staff and our processes are not able to process the applications at the same rate as they're coming in. So we need to do something about that. We have a backlog, and we need to bring down that backlog. And so in the near term, we're talking about how to, we have to figure out how to speed up processing. But so one way that we reduce too much friction is we were overly generous in the information that we would allow people to submit, right? So we're coming from a human-centered technologist group. Like, we want to make it easy for people. We don't want to throw up barriers to them, but we now have a backlog, and that backlog includes a lot of records that don't have, like, the data is not pristine. There's missing information. There's wrong information, and people are going to have to go and deal with that, right? So one of the things that we're now talking about is actually backing away from being sort of generous and human-centered in the way that our forms receive people, and making it harder to submit an application by requiring a higher standard of accuracy and validation.
Okay. So in this process, and we're going to get to the people's question, like in the process, obviously you can't make a by breaking eggs, right? So during this process, did you lose documents? Did some things that were about to be approved get lost? You have people coming to you kind of like, I've applied for this job, this permit 6 months ago, and it's gone, right? So how many eggs have you broken, and if any?
Yeah, many eggs have been broken. I mean, fortunately, I don't think that we have lost anything, but what is happening is that people are not able to access status information in the way that they would like to, because we have moved some things around in time, right? Like, I talked about the informal process. And so, there was a process designed to not take custody for the city to take custody until, like, all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. And so, these informal, undocumented conversations happened, and they happened again and again, and people would get sent away and sent away and sent away. And then finally they were able to submit their applications officially. And at that point, it's trackable and it lives in the system. Now we're taking it right up front. And so people are letting go of their thing. And there's a period of time where they don't necessarily have access to status information because it hasn't made it far enough to be tracked. And so that is causing a great deal of anxiety with people. Okay. And then there's things like, multiple people who are working on a project all decide to submit an application for the same thing. So that's, one of the many ways that staff are going to have to go back through and kind of manually reconcile what's going on.
So I have one more question before we jump to questions, like the business as usual part of the stick, right? So during this project, you had to be still working, right? So did you think it was harder to digitize the old processes and all those mountain of documents, or actually you're starting a brand new process, the new permits being asked, and they were 100% digital?
So one of the compromises that we made right up front is digitize. Like, we never wanted to recreate the old process digitally, and my team actually had a pilot going for like a more of a clean sheet approach to a digital end-to-end experience. And because of the mandate around speed and like enabling people to interact with the system as quickly as possible, we did wind up taking a lot of old stuff digital that we knew was not like a great experience and that wasn't necessarily a great fit for digital. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
No, it's fine. I just know you find yourself in a place between two chairs, right? You had the old stuff that had to come to new stuff, and you have new stuff that had to be invented from scratch. So at some point, you had to compromise with the old stuff and the new stuff.
Yeah.
So which one was harder?
I think we're so deep in it right now. It's hard to answer that question. I think we're in a place where we have, on the front end, we've responded to all of the like absolute hair on fire emergency things for the most part. So our engineers are currently doing some back-end integrations to help, to help make the process more efficient on the staff side. And while that's happening, we're taking a step back to look at to try and have a little bit more of a plan going forward of how this should work. But it's a problem space of massive complexity and a lot of different codes and departments. So it's hard to cross that gap from like the messy present to the ideal future.
Got it. Brendan, do you want to start with some question maybe to Kristin?
Absolutely. So we're going to back up here a little bit. And I think some of the questions are applicable to both Kristen and Iran. So some were targeted early while Kristen was speaking. So we'll just kind of wing it from there. So I think our first question, if I could back up here, was from Matthew Ship. He said, what kind of qualitative and quantitative data were you getting that were driving, those decisions that you were making, and how did you obtain it?
Thankfully, we're pretty insistent on, whatever we ship, we need to track to decide if we need to enhance or downgrade or something. So I'm pretty deep in Firebase and Google Analytics, and then keeping an eye on social, given how quickly the landscape changes week over week and what people need and want. As an example, groceries were this thing to deliver at the start of COVID here in Dallas, and we saw strikes and walkouts with Instacart and Whole Foods, and that was the thing to do. And then 2 months later, now it's more about restaurants and to-go orders, and now that people are venturing out, the landscape has shifted yet again. So just trying to keep an eye on how people interact with our digital touch points and then what they're saying about it through social. And then also we get feedback from our drivers. Part of the leadership meeting every morning, including weekends, has been with Director of Driver Operations. And so we hear from our drivers and from dispatch every day. How was it yesterday? What was new? Just trying to leverage all eyes and ears.
Very cool. Do you have any, this is from Rebecca, do you have any key moments in your process that got you there? Do you have any visuals you can share at all? And you don't have to do it right this second, but maybe sometime during this meeting, is there anything you can share that are kind of, that was that nascent point or that inflection point where you're like, hey, what if we?
There were a lot of those. I'll admit, I've been talking about now we're seeing the uptick in all of our products, and it's looking well. It's still stressful, but it was sufficient, not seamless, when we were implementing all these things and honestly pivoting day to day and week to week. So visuals, this would just be the visuals I could offer would just be to kind of reinforce internal communication and alignment so you can keep moving quickly. So use Overflow for app mapping. We did animate a few of our apps in prototypes to get direct driver feedback before we implemented it, because that's a completely different environment that we can't account for. Not a lot of pretty visuals to share.
Okay, no worries. So riffing off of your answer to our previous question, Dharmesh asked, what role did the drivers play in your reinvention? What kind of data did you get from the drivers that helped drive those design changes?
Oh yeah, our drivers are critical to how we implement. So one of the 5 products that we launched was also kind of an admin portal where dispatch has has a hand in monitoring and supporting and assisting along with our engineers on call, the drivers who are out on their shifts. And then every morning, we check in with the director of driver ops, just what feedback are we hearing? The strongest feedback we're hearing right now is with regards to passengers not wearing masks. And we survey the drivers, like, how do you feel about wearing masks? How do you feel about passengers wearing masks? And that made our decision.
So the feedback you were getting from your director of driver ops, was that kind of verbal and stand-ups? And you just mentioned that you were surveying drivers. Like, what tools were you using? SurveyMonkey or what?
We have a digital channel called Driver Success where drivers can submit feedback at any hour. And then otherwise I'll check in with Director of Driver Operations in our 8:30 a.m. stand-up or Director of Driver Training and kind of see how we're doing.
So you have an internal tool. You have an internal tool then that lets them kind of shortchange all of that, so you don't have to.
Yes, that's one of the channels we used to intake. It used to be that I and a few other leaders would take a driver shift once a month and get firsthand feedback at the depot before and after our shift. But that has been changed. So we do have a digital intake channel that then we feed into the Slack channel for company-wide visibility, and then intake that into the backlog if there are digital enhancements that are needed, and move forward.
Very cool. Thank you.
Christopher, Robin, do you have a question for Ira, maybe, so we can mix it up a little bit, or to both?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Going back in here, I'm wondering if my question was one of the first ones that popped up for Iran. But okay, we got from Nick here, or maybe Kristen. But can you talk about the issues you might have had when you made edits or changed the workflows, responsibilities of your coworkers? Any issues or an issue I've seen when I've trying to work with HR to make work streams more efficient when you introduce a new customer or facing processes. So I guess he's seeing some issues when doing that. So any discoveries when you started shifting things around? Or
So I actually want to combine that with the questions below that are around engaging people. And so the answer to the engaging service users as co-designers, there was a lot of facilitation with staff. The nature of building permits in San Francisco is that they are reviewed by many different departments who are all reviewing for different codes. And so, it's very technical. I didn't know anything about this stuff a year ago. And so the value that I bring sometimes is really about facilitating and sort of pulling out different perspectives and then being able to kind of describe the process that they have agreed upon. And they are some of my service users, obviously. The other service users that I think the intention of this question is around, you would maybe call them customers, and we do sometimes call them customers or applicants, but not everyone who applies for a building permit is a professional. There are lots of people who are maybe like a homeowner or a small business owner. They do it once, they're done. But there's also people who are doing this every single day because it's their livelihood is tied in with the construction industry and they have a particular expertise. So San Francisco is actually a pretty small community as a city, and this world is small. And so as a city staffer, there is a lot of communication back and forth between the professional communities who use this service and city staff. So we've had regular Q&A sessions with them over Microsoft Teams Live. A lot of people have my phone number, my email address, my colleagues' phone number and email addresses. And we hear from people about things that are broken. We also occasionally will reach out and either do more formal research or informal, or just like get informal information about how things are going. when we launched the first new digital form, we put a survey on it. So we have that as well. There's a lot of communication back and forth between both the applicants and the professional community, and also a lot of facilitated communication with staff. And so we're, trying to listen and learn. And the hardest thing is when there are like really differing opinions within these different groups about how to do things. So that's hard.
So since you're mentioning the internal processes and the bureaucratic process of approving things, so again, you work in a government space, and not a lot of us do so. So do you feel like COVID-19 kind of like made things go faster because of the sense of emergency? Like what you've done in 3 months would have taken years, right? But beside that, the actual approval process, getting the budget, getting the green light from top down or bottoms up, did you feel like it was actually a good thing, quote to quote? And same for you, Kristin. I'm assuming things move a lot faster, right, out of necessity.
Yeah, I mean, yes. We got a lot of decisions made much more quickly than they would have been under normal circumstances.
So does that make you wonder?
Sorry, go ahead.
Does that make you wonder why it's taking so long usually? I mean, it can be done, obviously.
It can be done.
But you can't say anymore.
I mean, I think this is an active and ongoing conversation in the city now. Like there are all sorts of different programs that digital services is involved in. And, it's absolutely a conversation, and there are so many things to run aground upon, right? Like little things like laws. And yeah, we'll see. Like it's early days yet. I mean, we're going to be digging our way out of this for a long time. And my hope is that that a silver lining of this is that we are able to change policy and reduce bureaucracy.
So the other side is for Kristen as well. Do you feel like there's going to be a price to pay for these cutting corners? And you've obviously made some sacrifices and compromises, right? And right now it's kind of like so far so good. But 6 months down the road, and Kristen, you as well, you're going to kind of like unearth problems. Kind of like, whoops, we didn't think about that. Now we're going to have a whole bunch of issues that we just didn't think about. Do you expect this?
Yes. Yeah, moving fast, launching and learning. We anticipate we're budgeting. We're keeping an eye on it, but there is tech debt. There's a trade-off. I echo Iran's laugh at the beginning of her answer. So we thankfully are expecting it. The ideal situation would be that we design a holistic product, scale it back for MVP, V1, V2, leave room for learning, and that would be a year-long release plan that we would decide upon much ahead of time, besides a week in advance or something. So we're anticipating this, but thankfully, all the work we did last year up until COVID hit and us pivoting our app to like loosely accommodate delivery rather than ride hailing or both, the architecture is strong and sufficient to where the products we built won't bottom out in 6 months. But it will take some extra rigor as we scale, just to keep reinforcing the work that we've done so far.
I wanted to riff off what Iran said, and Kristen, this probably applies to you. So I've worked on some banking and some healthcare services and apps, and that's where I ran into law and lawyers and regulations and things like that. Robin's nodding his head because he works in financial space as well, right? It turns out that, we have all these amazing ideas for improving a service, removing friction, and all of a sudden we run into lawyers and laws and all this stuff that it feels like it's hampering progress, hampering user success, hampering a great service design. But you talked about how those frictions sometimes were sort of necessary. This is for both Iran and Kristen. Have you guys run into situations where you were trying to optimize things and or create better experiences only to discover that there were in fact laws or regulations or things in place to protect or help individuals where your improved service was actually antithetical to the actual improved service?
I'm so glad you asked that. One of my personal passions is digital accessibility, and the app I inherited when I came on board with Alto almost a year ago had the line hard-coded. And so from a digital accessibility standpoint, that's a no-go. And here in Texas versus New York, California, and Florida, the legal reinforcement of digital accessibility is less than. But since we are targeting rolling out to California at the end of the year, and we already made moves in V2 of our app to have it accommodate dynamic type and other accessibility considerations, one of the 5 products we've launched also, or are about to launch, is a web app, so that users who are not necessarily comfortable using the phone can use our services through their desktop or iPad if they want. And with California being one of the top 3 states to be most thorough with making sure there's some compliance with digital accessibility, we at least got to see it coming and got to accommodate that, and now more people can enjoy our products and services.
Yeah, I have a story about that too, and this is kind of it's a little bit meta, but I think it's a window into some of the things you have to think about in government that you don't have to think about in the private sector. My group, and this was before I started with digital services, but we worked on the first digital application for cannabis retail permits for equity applicants, because San Francisco was prioritizing equity applicants. And so the people basically who were adversely impacted by previous criminal prohibitions on cannabis, and the city made a decision to give those applicants priority in launching legal cannabis retail. So like good digital services folks, the team was doing usability testing before they launched the application, and one of the applicants after the fact complained that because not every potential applicant did usability testing with this app, that they were potentially disadvantaged in getting their application in, because there's really only so many qualifying addresses that can be permitted for cannabis. So there's a limited pool of these things that could go through, and so potentially there would have been a disadvantage to being a later applicant. And so that started a process of the city attorney looking at our user research practices. And so we have to jump through a lot of hoops now when we do research with people to make sure that we're not doing anything that could potentially even be perceived as advantaging some people over others. And so we work with a third party nonprofit that helps us with our recruiting. Like, we have to be very, very scrupulous in this stuff. And, certainly in the problem space that I work in, where there are so many relationships, like there is a perceptual problem potentially with with talking to some people and not others. So
Erin, we're going to be wrapping up pretty quickly here. I have one more question. So this particular topic is about practicality, right? We talk about high level service design methodology, and we've read the books, but you guys have had to throw the book, so to speak, right? So usually service design is very can be very rigid, right? User research, stakeholder interviews, the blueprint, all that stuff, and then you get to prototyping, and there is a regime that can be broken. But in this case, I'm assuming you had to just completely ignore the rules and just change them. So tell me exactly how you went from very high level academic, because I know you come from Adaptive Path, which literally wrote the book on service design, and you probably had to just make things that you would have never thought you would have to do. So can you tell us about what have you done that you would say you would have never should have done, but you did, and you're glad you did?
I'm not sorry about any of the things that I have done. I'm sorry about the things that I haven't done. So when I took the job, I was a team of one, and I was largely embedded outside of digital services and not really working with other designers. So there were just a lot of things that were parts of my process that I very much valued that I wasn't able to do with the rigor that I wanted, because I was like kind of participating in a lot of other, like maybe more generic project managery activities. And that was hard because, like before I was a service designer, I was a graphic designer. Process is really important. But, there was just only so much of my time to go around. And what I traded away in process rigor, I had the opportunity to be in the room and contribute ideas and opinions. And so like contributing ways of thinking and ways of talking about experience and like holding that perspective of the end-to-end experience and using low fidelity versions of tools like service blueprints when I could. And honestly, that was the hardest thing about my job up until COVID. It was every day not knowing if I was doing it right, because there were days when I just felt so far from the process.
So, Kristen, do you agree with that? I mean, you come from product, you're the head of product. So again, there is a very different kind of like regimen you apply to developing a product. I'm guessing in this case, you just did everything wrong, right? Tell us about what you've learned from that. And would you do it again? Would you do it different? Like people are actually listening to the call right now. What can I get from you in terms of like, oh, I shouldn't be doing that, but you did it and it worked. So.
Yeah, it's my background. I started out at a very large telecom enterprise and then pivoted to digital agency, where I may have only been overseeing one or two products, given the contract scope, and us jumping to 5 products. All the rules are thrown out the window, and there's this. It's very exciting. I love experimenting. I love moving fast, and then there's this peripheral trepidation of like the process isn't here, and so once we get 6 months down the road, like where and how can we right the ship in case what is needed and crucial right now is a friction point 6 months from now. That said, because we are so small and had a process that was fitted for 2 products instead of 5 going into this, we've gotten to overhaul. I've at least, helped overhaul a lot of the engineering processes. And because of that, we're now actually, I say actually a lot, but we are enjoying more efficient backlog grooming and sprint planning and more efficient sprints. And so that's been rewarding to at least see some process maturation out of us moving fast and breaking things.
So both of you, if you have like,
I have to go to a sprint planning meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Since COVID, like now I'm suddenly part of the agile.
Well, it's 1 o'clock, so we're wrapping it up. So thank you both for being here today and sharing your very practical and very, definitely real life experiences of service design and how it was, good for you so far. So we'll make sure to do a follow up with you maybe now, in 6 months from now and see what happened. If you were able to recreate some friction into your experiences or maybe remove some friction, we don't know. Thank you everybody for being here. We'll see you guys on the 25th of June with Andy Pauline. Let me see if I quickly show you this. So yes, on the 25th, we have Andy talking about the advanced service design, and we have Jesse talking about innovation startup. And then Megan and Eric will talk to us about super practical service design blueprinting and how to do it and some great tips and everything. Once again, thank you so much, Iran. Thank you so much, Kristin. Thank you for all of you. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Brenda. This was fantastic. And I really appreciate that you sharing your secret sauce and when you stumbled with a smile. So that's very nice to hear that. No, it's okay to break eggs and still be okay with that.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.